Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for coming here. This is the hardest one to have time to have a session right after lunch. So you have to, but we're gonna really wow you. So keep you make you excited and energized. So we're gonna have a session on policy, organizing, and action for change. And we have four really wonderful speakers who's going to present, I think, some really kind of thoughtful and innovative and compelling strategies. But let me, before I kind of introduce them and their particular topics, I just want to make a couple of points that I think is very pertinent to this panel. The first is that there's I hear a lot about of negativism, about what is happening in this country and how under current circumstances there's not much progress or victories, and I think these presentations really speak to how untrue that is. And that I see, particularly in communities and work at the local level, at the state level, lots of advances. And so I think the first thing I would like you to get out of this session is how what incredible work is going on and how optimistic we could be. The second is that these are really truly very innovative and thoughtful strategies to advance environmental justice. And they actually, cover a wide span of different areas. Like Yudith is going to, Prieto is going to talk about climate justice and youth work. Leslie Fields is going to talk about, the response to hurricanes, particularly in Puerto Rico. Adriene Hollis is going to talk about how the use of a toolkit around how communities can work with state implementation plans. Now, state implementation plans, if you know anything about environmental law, are really complex, and there is just a digress a little bit of background to this, because this came out of the Climate Justice Forum and WEAC's work around the Clean Power Plan and how to implement that. But they took that and given things where things are now with a Clean Power Plan, took that and the lessons from that and took it into another realm of work, right? So and then Vivek. Maru is going to talk about putting the power of law in people's hands, the use of community lawyering, the idea that we can arm communities with better legal skills so that they can be more effective. And so, like I said, these are really very innovative and thoughtful strategies that are both in response to community needs and environmental problems, as well as being proactive in terms of strategies to get ahead of the problem. So the last point before I ask you Yudith to come up is to give this one last thought. For those of you that know me, I have been working on environmental justice for quite a long time. I think. If I don't want to date myself, but I gave a talk once, last year, where I said, advancing environmental justice, lessons from 40 years of practice, or nearly 40 years of practice, and so one of the things I said in there is I started working on these issues before there was a name for environmental justice. And so what I just described and what you will hear is to see that there's just a glimpse of the kind of progress that's been made, from when like I said, when environmental justice, when people used to ask me, so what is environmental justice? You know, when it didn't really have a name, and, you know, the idea that, you know, certain communities were affected disproportionately to environmental harms, and how that, the protests that gave rise to a movement that is now spawning all these different types of strategies and approaches and relationships and the kind of victories is really impressive. So, that's the three things I would like you to think about as you listen to these presentations. So with that, I will ask Yudith to come up and give the first presentation.
Thank you, Charles. Hey everyone, my name is Judith Nieto, and I am actually based out of Houston, Texas, and I come from a community very similar to the young woman that spoke earlier, so I felt right at home when she was speaking. Let me just figure this out. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I come from a community that's very similar to the young woman that spoke earlier, and so Baltimore feels like home in a way. Houston is the second largest petrochemical complex in the world, and so with that, you can only imagine what kind of ailments people have, cancers and all kinds of things, and so youth are at the front line of that issue. And also now throwing climate change into the mix, and now a lot of the things that are happening around climate change are also impacting chemical security and chemical disaster threat in our communities, which we just saw not too long ago during Harvey. I wasn't there, but I actually got stuck in Atlanta. I couldn't get home, I couldn't get on a flight, and I couldn't drive back because the highways were closed. So it was really, really traumatizing for me to hear on the news everything that was happening and hear all of the pollution alerts that were coming up, and my family was in the middle of it, and not being able to evacuate because there is no evacuation plan in those when that happens. But anyway, back to youth. We're very important. Everyone's important, right? Everyone's important. But in terms of youth, the work that the APHA and folks that we're working with, they center youth in these types of events and these types of strategies, because youth carry that energy, right? That carry us through our organizing and our strategies. And I see it here and I see it everywhere, and it's so amazing to see youth organizers be uplifted and also be supported. One of the things that we talked about at the Climate Justice Summit with Adrienne and all of these folks at the APHA was that we also need to support them financially and be able to create opportunities for them to stay engaged, and not take them as incentives, but support, because these youth are also struggling financially and they're struggling with all these other things, and we need to keep them engaged, and what better way to do it than to support them on their journey to do the work, the heavy lifting of the work that we're also doing. Anyway, some of the summit objectives that we heard were to hear the lessons learned from a lot of the elders, community organizers, policy folks, and public health folks, because the way that things have been going, it just seems like we're still not putting frontline communities at the forefront. We're still not acknowledging their expertise and their lived experience as valuable resources of knowledge, and not giving credit where it's due, right? Oh. Hello. Welcome. And also to increase knowledge of EJ. We're still hearing that EJ is a new thing, and that it's this hip thing that's coming up, and this new sexy thing for funding and things like that. But who are the people that are going to receive the resources when it comes to EJ? And then how many people actually do know what environmental justice is, and who's actually living under environmental injustices? And you're giving them the podium to speak on their issues and letting them speak for themselves. and also to share perspectives, data, tools, approaches, and resources, which all of those exist in these types of spaces. And we need to open those up to community-based groups that are doing this work and doing this heavy lifting, and making sure that those resources and tools get to those people that are doing the work. And to develop new partnerships and develop impactful recommendations, not just talking about it and preaching to the choir, but also implementing those things in policies and agreements within these types of spaces. That was kind of the agenda. I want to share this because I really enjoyed listening to the elders speak around the work that they've been doing, and seeing the value of storytelling, as a real thing to get these things going, and seeing storytelling and oral histories as a really rich source of knowledge when it comes to these types of practices. These are, I guess, just some perspectives on the lightning talks. We had a lightning talk where the youth were leading the conversation around what it means to incorporate climate justice issues into all of the things that all of the folks were doing, which were researchers, public health sector folks, and everyone that was involved there. Because the thing that was happening was these conversations were sort of happening around the tables informally and formally. Like, we had time set aside to talk about these issues, but the ideas and the recommendations that were coming out of these conversations were so valuable. And oftentimes, they don't always get recorded because we're just kind of having a side conversation, but that's where a lot of that organizing happens and that strategy building happens. And so this was a really beautiful thing to see come up. And so the role of youth. We were at the central, the conversation about youth was centered on the role the youth can play in fostering community engagement and the value of intergenerational learning. And so again, this is something that I'm kind of repeating, and just how important it is to have that intergenerational learning experience. Because as youth, we don't think, or sometimes we do think we know it all, but really we don't, And we need that support of those folks that have been building these types of movements, these strategies, and these visions, so that we can help support that vision. And so we don't sort of get distracted, or, we get kind of, not displaced, but we just want to go in that same direction that the elders started to envision for us, and so we can carry that on. And with the support of the folks that have been doing it for a while, it just becomes easier, right? The load is not so heavy, and we're not just engaging in these conversations that are going nowhere. Also, youth may represent communities that they are working from, that they are from when working with grassroots organizations and governmental agencies. Youth who are students can bridge gaps between university and community by participating in or leading collaborative research or preparing grant applications for foundation or governmental funding opportunities. And again, that's that same thing that we're talking about, where that there is a gap between academia and community groups that sometimes just doesn't work out, and we begin fighting each other, and the work just doesn't, hello? Welcome. Yeah, so youth can bridge that gap between agencies and research projects. I know I was at the last talk when they were talking about the cement factory that was happening, and how they couldn't find, or they were having problems sort of collecting the data of the people that were being exposed. Well, youth can play a big role in helping find those resources and the tools that the community needs to be able to collect that data. I worked in Houston. I worked closely with a high school that was collecting data in my neighborhood to help implement some policies and regulations in my community. And it was so helpful because not everybody had the time and the enthusiasm to go around the neighborhood in the heat, in the summer heat in Texas, to collect water and to talk to neighbors and do the canvassing work and do the lead work because everyone was tired or working a full-time job. But these students took time out of their weekends to go and collect this data and talk to folks. And they had the energy and they had the enthusiasm to be part of something much bigger, and their work was amplified by the elders and their mentors who were supporting them. So again, youth can also be a rich fountain of knowledge and resources and tools to push these strategies forward, but we also need to support them financially and help them stay engaged professionally and in community spaces. Again, the value of intergenerational learning, working in an intergenerational setting can provide mentoring and opportunities and building relationships with our elders who have an immense amount of knowledge that can help us push these strategies forward. And storytelling and oral history, again, like I said, can play a big role in building trust and respect between the people that are working together. Because oftentimes, if we're not coming from the same backgrounds or we're not from the same community, a lot of the times we feel like we're not being honored in that way. So feeling like you're not being respected or your knowledge and expertise is not being respected sometimes doesn't, keep you engaged, and it just kind of throws everything off. So we need to build trust and relationships, strong relationships to each other so that we can do this heavy lifting, because this is not just, it's not simple work, and it's not just, whatever, I'm going to do this for a little bit. This is a lifelong journey that we're all trying to build a better world, a more equitable world, and that requires a lot of relationship building and a lot of trust between the people involved. And so, you just need to make space for the youth, and if you're clashing and you're not seeing the same thing, then it takes a little bit more time until we get there, right? So maybe being a little bit patient. And this is the group that I am a part of, the Youth Perspectives on Climate Change. It's a really long name, but it's the first of its kind. There's 15 of us working on a report on how federal government should engage youth and keep them engaged. And these people are so amazing. They've been doing so much great work in all of their communities. We're all over the country, and this sort of serves as a model on how organizations and academia can engage youth and maybe allow them to become the next stewards in their communities. I'm not sure how much time I have. Oh, nobody's keeping track. Oh, I thought somebody was keeping track. Never mind. Oh yeah, I don't have to do this. There's also a summit video that was created after the summit, which sort of talks about the people that are featured in the video are amazing elders. Richard Moore from Los Jardines Institute in New Mexico, and Dr. Mildred McLean out of the Harambe House in Savannah, Georgia, who really set the stage for how we want to be engaged in this movement. And remembering that the work of all the folks that have been in the environmental justice movements since the civil rights movement and beyond, we need to always put those folks, or remember the teachings of all those folks. And one of the things that Richard Moore said at the end was to never forget where we come from, because place matters. Where you come from, who your family is, what your struggle has been, plays a big role in who you are and what you mean to the movement. And never forget where you came from. Always remember who made it possible for you to be here. That'd be your parents, your family, or the ancestors of our people that struggled for so long to get us here and get where we are. And always give back what was been given to you. So once you get to a position of power and resources, make sure that you think back about those communities that you come from and that help support you and help to get you where you are today. But that's all I have. I don't know if I should take up more time. Thank you so much. One thing I did forget that I didn't have up there was the conversation about what just transition looks like to you. Being from the South, we talk a lot about just transition and what that means to us, but we are so far behind because in the South, that's the sacrifice zone of the United States. So I'm curious to know how just transition is being talked about in the North, because everything that comes out of the South is being used up north, and we're not having that conversation across borders. So I just want to pose that question. Start thinking about what just transition even means to you in your community, and how that can work out in a much broader strategy with the Southern.
So everybody remember, that's going to be
there's a quiz.
a topic for discussion later. So Adrienne, why don't you? No, Leslie, you're next.
Alrighty, find my stuff.
Don't close it, just.
Oops. Whoops.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm really delighted to be here. I'm Leslie Fields. I'm the Environmental Justice and Community Partnerships Director for the Sierra Club in DC. And we, as you probably know, the Sierra Club is that big, hoary, old environmental organization. It's 125 years old. Was founded when John Muir took Teddy Roosevelt out to the woods. That then became Yosemite. And they, of course, to do that, they had to kick out the people living there. So we are grappling with those issues, and to that end, we have 63 chapters, and some of them are magnificent chapters. Some of them need support. Some of them need a lot of support. I want to discuss the work around one of our most magnificent chapters, which is our Puerto Rico chapter. We have an extremely robust chapter in Puerto Rico. It was founded 13 years ago, and the work that they are doing in community in Puerto Rico has been really incredible, and I want to lift up some of this work in community with communities post the 2017 hurricane season, because it really was, we are working very closely with folks down there, and the storm continues. It has not abated. Just like the rest of the communities, such as in the Gulf Coast with Harvey, as Yudith has mentioned, Nate. It was really a terrible, 2017 was the worst hurricane season since 2005, which was the season of Katrina, Rita, Wilma, as you may remember. So we had, in 2017, we had we had, get the names mixed, we had Harvey, Irma, Jose, Maria, and Nate. And so I was last down there at the end of March, and these pictures were taken like the last week of March. This is in San Juan, and this is still the case. There's a very serious situation with the power grid. As you all probably, I hope you've read, that the power is still going out, that hundreds of thousands of people still don't have power. That's in San Juan, and that was near a hotel. And what is happening is that there's still this situation, and partly due because what first happened was Irma came and glanced off of Puerto Rico. It was a Category 5, but it was about 150 miles outside of Puerto Rico. Then 10 days later came Maria. Maria was a Category 4. It was a direct hit on the whole island, and 80% of the power was knocked out. 3.4 million people were affected. So everything was out. Water, sanitation, cell phones, everything was out. And then there was incredible heavy rainfall. The mountains, Puerto Rico, for those of you who haven't been, it's very mountainous, it's very, very beautiful. The mountains were denuded of trees. So the heavy rainfall caused mudslides, and the entire island was under flash flood warning. The entire island. It's like one of the first times that the National Weather Service, declared that for a whole area of the United States. And so it's very serious, and there was a lot of, they were immediately put under the Stafford Act for became a national disaster area. You all probably saw President Trump go down there and throw paper towels at people, and which that just hurt my heart. I don't know what else to say about it. Moody's Analytics estimates that $45 billion to $95 billion worth of damage. Also significantly, 80% of the crop value, 80% of the agriculture on that island was destroyed. The farming community there is really, really suffering. And you have to remember that the United States annexed Puerto Rico in 1898 after the Spanish-American War. They are fellow citizens of the United States. They have a delegate they vote for. They have a legislature. They have a governor. They have mayors of their towns. They can't vote in presidential elections, but they can vote in many other elections, as I mentioned. They don't pay a national income tax, but they pay many, many, many other taxes. There are other federal taxes that they pay. And there are, in addition to the Democrats and Republicans there, they also have basically three factions. There's an independence party, there's a statehood party, and then there's a Commonwealth party. And I bring this all up just to say it keeps things really nice and complicated about the relationship with the United States. And it does impact on what's going on with the recovery in Puerto Rico. And so when FEMA went down there, all kinds of contracts were allowed for the recovery for the electrical grid. And you probably heard about Whitefish, you probably heard about all these other contracts that were permitted for people who really didn't have the capacity to do them. So what's interesting is that they are replacing the wires, but they're not taking away the old stuff. So this old stuff is still lying around. And this is what really I just think is crazy. Because I talked to these guys, I've been there four times since the hurricane. So the crews are coming down, they're flying in from Birmingham, they're flying in from Arkansas. And you can talk to these guys on the plane, and they're only allowed to do what their contract says. Their contract says, we don't pick up this old stuff here, they're going to leave it. All right, so much of the issue is, for the just recovery of Puerto Rico, is that in the south part is where the coal plants are, and then in the 40s and 50s, they did by helicopter, which was very innovative back then, they put the poles for the wiring, the transmission, through the mountains by helicopter. So you've got the coal plants in the south, and then San Juan and the other municipalities up north, and the transmission's been knocked out. So what we're working on in many cases, so this is still more of the destruction. This is in late March. A lot of the stuff has not been picked up. And this is that wiring that I'm telling you about. It's everywhere. And that also we have an issue with, the rodents. We have an issue with the trash not being picked up and all the debris. We have been working very closely with communities on these issues, and also on the national level with many, many, many coalitions, the Climate Justice Alliance, the faith community, many partners. And there's also the mangrove, Puerto Rico has incredible biodiversity. So the mangrove swamps were also decimated, and that has also helped in terms of keeping the island, the water table, keeping the island, so we don't have that. This all here this is outside of what's called Arecibo, which we've been, there's an incinerator being proposed there. Same company, Energy Answers, which tried to put this incinerator in Curtis Bay and up the road in Baltimore. So very similar situation, and it's just harder because Puerto Rico is having a debt crisis, as you may remember, and they have a control board put over them, very similar to what we had in DC. And so it's called, the law is called PROMESA, and so it's an unelected board that's over them and dictating a lot of how the recovery is going, which is not, which are working community, so it is more just and fair. That's just one of the mangrove swamps. It's really, really got contaminated with the storm. This is in the south, this is the coal plant in Guayama. This is as close as we could get. This is Mount Coal Ash. This is 5 stories. So the last time I was there before the storm, this top was like almost to here. This all got blown off. All this coal ash, all this toxic coal ash, arsenic, heavy metals got blown away. The Environmental Quality Board of Puerto Rico told AES, who owns this facility, to cover this mound before Irma, and they didn't get around to it. So all this went all over the place. There's a road, you can't see it from here. This is so high, there's a road they built to get up to the top of that. So they built to get up to the top to put the cover on, but they never got around to it. So there's a lot of community been protesting this plant. It's been a real problem. I know I gotta go faster. So this is the coal plant Aguirre, and I just wanted to show you how close it is to houses, playground. It's right there, okay? This is the I've seen a lot of coal plants in my day. This is the loudest coal plant I've ever heard in my life. This thing is so, the noise pollution is just outrageous, 24/7. Come on, I'm stuck. Oh, oops, okay. This is somebody's house, right next to this plant. Okay, they just finished putting a new roof on it. And there's the boats, and they're about to go out to this is right at the end of that. This is a beautiful quay. They want to put a gas plant in here, through here. There's manatee out here. It's just really special. So all these things are being proposed as a way to deal with this debt crisis and to get more investment in Puerto Rico. That we are working very hard in communities to support that doesn't happen. So this is a community meeting in Salinas, which is also in the south. They had created their own solar community farm before the storm with the University of Mayagüez. And so we're supporting them. This is our organizer, Roberto Tomas. And we're supporting, and that's the fantastic environmental attorney, Ruth Santiago, known as Tata. And they've been working in that community with our organizer and many other folks to figure out how to reestablish the solar co-op and farm since it got blown away and get some funding for that. This is in a school. About 200 schools have been closed because of the debt crisis. The parents went in, they broke in, they cleaned it up, and this school is being used for classrooms and also as a community center for meetings. And so it's very important, that facility. We're also very concerned about the just transition, as Judith mentioned. And the utility is called, the utility PREPA has a lot of workers. These are very good middle-class jobs. And the issue is if we're going to move to microgrids, if we're going to move to more community solar, what's going to happen with the workers? And so we're working very closely with UTR, the union. This is Angel Jaramillo, who is the president of UTR, the Utility Workers Union. And he is in constant communication with the federal government, the island. This is our colleague, Pedro Cruz, who's our infrastructure guru. There's Roberto, there's Liz, one of my other colleagues, there's Ramon, that's not Ramon. Anyway, so a lot of great people, but UTR is really fighting the battle about saving their union members' jobs. So there's still middle class jobs, and also how to making the transition from this PREPA. The utility still burns what we call bunker seat oil. It's the most dirty oil ever, and they're still burning it. And it's the management deciding that, it's not the union. And then we were able to, Sierra Club was able to get about $1 million in donations online. So we were able to send down many solar lanterns to folks. And this is Canyo Menendez, he's the chapter chair. This is our friend Edwin. And so this was another event. We were just passing out solar lanterns and other things. We had a lot of those events. This is the water filter system that we probably had about 5,000 of those, where you put water in the bucket and it goes through this, the gravity brings this water down through the filter system and you can have clean water. But in no way does this substitute for the government. These are municipal responsibilities. These are governmental responsibilities that need to happen in the communities. And so these are just stopgap measures. We've got a lot of those, thousands of those out, but it's still not enough. And the fact that people are still using these systems in March, late March of 2018 is very disturbing. Well, that's just a pretty house that I like. I just wanted to show this because the spirit of the folks, people are fighting back hard. They are reclaiming their communities. They are still doing their art. They are still engaged. in so many things, and there's lots and lots of ways to get involved. I'm happy to talk more about it. But a lot of it has been, we've been doing a lot of advocacy around the supplemental budgets, making sure that the funding that goes to the right community, the communities through the mayors, through their city councils, that it's not going to get sucked up into the feeding the bondholders from ASA, which is our concern, is that it's just all going to be about, paying off the bondholders because of the debt. And I can go on and on how that debt was created and who's responsible for that debt from the Clinton administration, but I don't have time. So, and then those are some of our friends and of our community folks and our friends. And this lady, this is Kano's sister, and she was without power for many, many months. And she still made all this food to give to her neighbors. She's just an amazing person. And so the storm continues, and hurricane season starts in about 6 weeks, right? So, but I wanted to let you know that there's still a lot of work to be done. The issues of the grid, how do we go from microgrids, but also preserve good jobs? How do we restore the schools? How do we restore the community? How do the people are able to speak for themselves, despite the fact that there's a overlord, unelected control board, dictating is very challenging and still going on. So I'll stop there. That's fine for me.
Adrienne, you're next.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I did what?
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. I am Adriene Hollis. I'm the Director of Federal Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice, which is an EJ organization headquartered in Harlem. I'm the DC office. I have I have one other person who's with me until next. She's graduating from school, so she might not be with me much longer. But what I want to talk about is our guidance document called Cleaner Air, Cleaner Communities, and this is available on our table out front. And I'm going to talk fast, not only because I'm from the South, but also because I don't want her to hold up the last thing that says you have no more time. So Charles kind of said it all. I told him, he said, you just did my presentation. We are at a crazy time right now. Crazy that we've been in 30 years when it comes to permits and policy and enforcement. And one thing we know for sure is that enforcement activities are probably going to be, are going to be sort of delegated to the state and local level. And when that happens, we need to be ready as community members, right? Community organizations. Because we need to be able to represent ourselves, and we need to have a seat at the table. And that was the sort of like the premise behind our document. And as Charles said, we started out initially developing this as part of the Clean Power Plan because under the executive order 12898, or as we call it, EJ order 12898, it talked about a number of things. I circled too: developing a strategy for implementing environmental justice and providing communities access to public information and public participation. And it's really interesting because this isn't something that is given to us, it's a right, right? It's not a requirement, it's given. It's our right. So I find I'm always tickled when I see, well, we're going to let you speak, and I'm like, yeah, no, we're going to let you speak. So a great friend of ours he's a retired professor now from University of Michigan, I think, Runyon Briah, defines environmental justice. We've heard we always use EPA's definition of environmental justice, and he took it just a step further and talked basically about it's who we are in our community. I'm sure we've all heard about meeting people where they are, and this sort of explains that. We talk about what our norms are and our values and rules and regulations and how we're brought up in our own communities and how we behave and what we need to be sustainable. And as Mustafa says, what we need in order to thrive and not just survive, right? And so that includes jobs. We talked about, I think Yudith and Leslie both talked about jobs, decent paying jobs and safe jobs and good schools and good housing and adequate health, well, good health care actually, and just give personal empowerment. You already have the power, it's really just using it. And then communities free of violence and drugs and poverty. And we know that the opioid epidemic and why that's such a big deal now is not necessarily because it's in communities of color, but it's because it affects more people who are, I guess, more white people than a lot of the other health effects that we've seen. And so these communities, environmental justice talks about communities where cultural and biological diversity are respected, like who we are as individuals is respected and accepted, and that's what's important. So I love that definition, and I told one of my friends I'm going to use that from now on. And so before I say this, Yudith talked about our summit that we did in November in Atlanta, and our friend, who some of you probably know, our good friend Bernice Miller-Travis, said something that I always use and I really shouldn't. She said, the Calvary ain't coming. We have to, she says, but help is on the way, because we've got to take care of each other, protect ourselves, and protect each other. So we're the Calvary, and so it's not going to be at the federal level. It's going to be at the state and local level. And our responsibility is to be involved and to represent ourselves and each other, right? So under the Clean Air Act, one of the requirements that states have is they have to come up with a plan, right? What are you going to do to clean up dirty air and protect your community? And of course, everybody doesn't do that. We've been hearing about that. I know I've been here in 2 great sessions this morning already, and I'm sure you have too, that the underlying message was we need to be, people need to do better. They need to do better with us. And then in some instances, we need to do better in representing letting our voices be heard, So if the Clean Air Act is enforced, then I'm only going to talk about this quickly. Basically, we're going to clean up the air, and that's what's really important, right? That's the main thing that we're trying to do, and that's what we kind of created, what we kind of talked about with the CJ guidance documents. So why are SIPs important, state implementation plans? Because it talks about how the state is going to clean up the environment, and usually it includes measures to reduce emissions, like we've heard about coal ash, we've heard about factories, incinerators, all that is supposed to be in the plan. And don't you think communities should be a part of that? Because they live there and they're going to be the ones affected first and worst. So the purpose of this was to develop a checklist to teach industries, to teach agencies how to work with communities, or how to make communities a stakeholder, to recognize that they are stakeholders when it comes to developing any kind of plan. Now, what I've learned since then, as I said, this started out with the Clean Power Plan. What we've learned, because actually some of the forum members that I work with sort of like brought it to my attention, sort of in discussion, was like, this is applicable across the board. Some of the things we've heard today, we could talk about it's not, so we should take out state implementation plan and just talk about cleaner air and cleaner communities and how to work with us. Because we can tell you better than, you can tell us how you should best include communities in any discussion, in any decision. So I'm going to take that to my boss. Tell her y'all said it. So, it's a 6-step process, right? Very simple. Look at what the issues are in the community, right? And it's going to be different for every community. So this is the EJ analysis that Executive Order 12898 describes. So who is the community that's affected? Let's talk about how we're going to get them involved, and then let's talk about what they need, right? What communities need. For example, when Dr. Wilson talked today, he said there hadn't been any air sampling or anything, and which was crazy to me, that nobody had done any baseline sampling. And then talk about what impacts and benefits would occur if you put this facility here. What's going to happen? If you shut down this facility, what's going to happen? And that could be something along the lines of jobs, concerns around jobs, or clean air, or the steps of the church that we saw this morning session would now be free of 3 pounds of cement, dust, and things of that nature. And then you develop this plan with everybody's input and then you engage the community in order to make it work. And we've had to stop people in different agencies along the process of trying to get communities involved. It's like, that's not going to, I mean, not trying to get communities involved, but trying to implement a process. And if I could, I'll just use, I'm going to say it was, what is it, Sierra Clubs. I know it's not you, I'm just looking at you because you are at Sierra Club. I know it's not you. It's okay. Their plan to develop, to be 100% energy efficient by 2050. And they were involving mayors and around the country.
100% clean energy.
100% clean energy, involving mayors. So it's like, yeah, you're right, this isn't going to work unless you get the community involved. I mean, you can get all the mayors on board if you want to, but the people are the ones that, are going to make this happen. So it's sort of like stopping every process to go back and remind people, yeah, but you can't do this without us. So this is first you have to get the lay of the land, right? Who are the communities that are most affected? And I'm not going to go through all of this because I also have it, as I said, in the book. But first you got to find out what's going on currently. And that includes looking at what's the quality of life issues. And if there's some environmental disparities, health impacts, what is going on with the economy? What about social things, educational level, language barriers? Just that you can't come to a community meeting where everybody speaks Vietnamese and do a presentation in English, really? Because that means you haven't done your background research, or it's not even research, just knowing who you're talking to, or if they even want you to come talk to them, right? So, and then it's about, Leslie just showed us a great picture about proximity, how close people live to the threat. And these are all things that you've got to know before you come up with a plan that's going to affect the people who live in that environment. And so some of these are like kind of easy, easy things that you have to know. And then step two, how are you going to involve the community? Because, and I've been, working, I'm from Mobile, Alabama. And so in Alabama, some of you may know, I'm from the South too. So in Alabama, there was a lot of, not a lot of this, stakeholder engagement, but there was a lot of this. Right, where we would go out, and I was never arrested, to my knowledge. But there was a lot of, hey, why don't you open the door and let us in? We're supposed to be in here. And unfortunately, that's still going on, and not just in Alabama, but all over the country, right? So what you want people to do is to structure on an authentic stakeholder engagement. And the reason an authentic is important because you can say you want people involved, but you really don't sometimes. And so you've got to make people, I guess you've got to make your feel, what I'm trying to say is that you want people to trust you. So make them believe that you really care, that you really want them at the table is what I'm trying to say. And just that you're sincere and that they can pick up on that, they can see that. So here's we created a table that people can use, and I have some note cards that I'd like you guys to take, and then if you see some things you think should be included, some people or some questions that we should be asking, I would love to have feedback, before you leave or even afterwards. And it's like we've included industry workers and truck drivers and agencies and students and people in the schools, just like Dr. Wilson, community leaders and community groups and healthcare providers, and everybody should be involved in any process that's going to affect that community. And that hasn't been the way things have been done in the past, right? But that's the way it should be done. So I'm wrapping it up. So once you identify community needs, like you talked about noise, odor, then you talk about impacts and benefits. If you start doing some sort of prevention mechanisms, how is it going to affect health? Right? Is it going to increase health? Are people going to be able to breathe better? And then develop the state plan. This is what we're going to do. Now that we've gotten everybody's input, this is what we're going to do. These are required in a SIP plan, and this is how you can get environmental justice to become part of that process. And I know I'm going through it fast. I apologize. And as I said, it is definitely in the fact sheet and in our book. And then the plan has to identify a clear, meaningful role for communities, and including some guidance about interacting with communities, right? And because you've got to be culturally competent. You can't just go into every community the same way, because every community isn't the same. So we're going to talk about utilizing citizen monitoring and enforcement. And this is something that Dr. Wilson also talked about, citizen science, which I believe in, but everybody doesn't. You know, and actually we have issues now with just scientific research data that does exist from our university partnerships. So citizen science, I question every day what's going to happen with that when that isn't even necessarily accepted by everybody as it stands right now. And then, important to know, all SIPs require a public hearing prior to approval, but the problem with that is everybody doesn't attend the public hearing. And a lot of the people that I talk with say that one of the reasons they don't attend or participate is that they don't understand what's going on. So, break it down, or just like, you know, speak to people, meet people where they are, whatever that means for whatever community. You know, you can't come in there, as I said, not only language barriers, but also you have to consider education. You have to consider experience. I've had communities that knew more than the agencies who came in and spoke to them, and had actually put them out of the room. You know, don't come back until you can talk to us in a way we can understand. It wasn't me. I was on the side with the community. But so these are some of the questions that I would like you to answer before you ask us questions. Is there anything missing? Because there's always something missing or something that can be added, and some other examples that talk about best practices, things that people have already engaged in, and any other resources that you think would be helpful. And then where could we start using this? I mean, some communities are already using it, but if you think your community or you know a community, we'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you very much. I'm going to get out of his way. Thank you. Yep, that's me. Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Adrienne. This is an extraordinary gathering, and it's seriously a privilege to be here. I want to talk about law. Law is supposed to be the language we use to translate dreams about justice into living institutions that hold us together. Law is supposed to be the difference between a society ruled by the most powerful and one that honors the dignity of everyone, strong or weak. But that is not the world we live in. The UN estimates that 4 billion people worldwide live outside the protection of the law. These people can be driven from their land, intimidated by violence, excluded from society. There are almost always laws on the books that protect them, but they've often never heard of those laws. And the systems that are supposed to enforce those laws. Are you having a hard time hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay. I might actually close this now that I think we have the room is full now. I was saying that there are almost always laws on the books that are supposed to protect these 4 billion people who live outside the protection of law, but they've often never heard of those laws. And the systems that are supposed to enforce those laws are corrupt or broken or both. Lawyers, meanwhile, are the ones who traditionally are kind of charged with providing people with access to law. I'm a lawyer myself, Adrienne is, maybe Leslie too. Some of my best friends are lawyers. But we have limits. As a tribe, as a profession, we have limits. We tend to be expensive, first of all, and we tend to focus on formal court channels that are impractical for many of the problems that people face. Our profession also has tended to associate law with a kind of expert culture. We've kind of tended to make it more mystical and complicated than it needs to be. And so I would submit to you guys that lawyers are crucial in closing the justice gap, no doubt, but we can't leave it to lawyers alone. In healthcare, for example, we don't just have doctors, we have nurses and midwives and community health workers. The same should be true of justice. Community legal workers, which sometimes we call community paralegals, or some places we say barefoot lawyers, can be a bridge. They help people to demystify law, to break it down into simple terms, and to help people find a solution. I lived in Sierra Leone for 4 years, in West Africa, and that's when I cut my teeth on this kind of thing. We ran a program where we worked with community legal workers who help people to access justice on all kinds of things, from domestic violence to unpaid wages to corruption. And if you go to a lawyer's office in Freetown and you bring a problem to him, he will often say something like, this is Sierra Leone Creole, say, I don't hear me, left the money, me go handle that for you. I heard you, leave some money on the table, I'm gonna handle it for you now, I've got you. The paralegal's message, the message of these community legal workers, is different from that. It's not, I'm gonna handle it for you, it's we're gonna solve it together. And in the process, we're both gonna grow. And you're gonna end up in a stronger position to advocate for yourself. That is why we call this work legal empowerment. That is the vision, to equip people to advocate for themselves. And I just want to give you an example. I put up these ladies, I put the black line across their eyes because what they are doing is dangerous. They are from Gujarat in Western India, which is the same state my own family comes from. And this is on the top of this is the terrace on the top of one of their homes. And if you just turn around from where they are standing, just behind their village is this bauxite processing site. Leslie put up the picture of the uncovered coal ash. It's a similar situation where there are stone crushers that are breaking up bauxite that has come from mines and then preparing it for export. And there's actually, between their house and that site, there's a nursery school along that lane right there. So talk about proximity. I think Adrienne mentioned proximity. These ladies told me that it was unbearable. I mean, they would wash their clothes and hang them up to dry. Before they were dry, the clothes would be covered in dust. They would cook food, and before they were ready to eat it, the food would be covered up in dust. There's huge rates of asthma in this community, and the doctor's a couple hours away. And a lot of young people started having kidney stones, and it got to the point where that doctor, who was a couple hours away, if a young person walked in with kidney stones, he would say, oh, you're from this particular village bordering this. He would recognize them because that condition was so prominent. They endured this for years, this situation. One of the reasons is that the contractor, and these conditions will be familiar to many of you, the contractor who runs that bauxite facility is a local parliamentarian, and he's very powerful and very ruthless. And so people are afraid to do something about it. But one day last year, one of the operators of the stone crusher was just being egregious. He was lifting up the bauxite and slamming it down on the ground in a way that was creating these clouds of dust. And these four ladies and a bunch of others just got fed up. And they picked up stones, thank you. They picked up stones and ran across into the site and started throwing stones at the machines. And these guys actually abandoned their machines, and they said they picked up their chappal, which is like their sandals that they wear, and they ran away. And the place shut down for one day, but the next day it started up again. And this is the time when these ladies met up with one of these community legal workers that I was describing. I'm not going to share his name either, because again, this work is dangerous, but I'm going to call him Kush. And Kush explained to these ladies that not only was this a terrible thing, but that there was law on their side, on the women's side. And he helped translate into their own language something that they had never seen, which is called the consent to operate, similar to a permit here in the United States. And he broke down for them the specific conditions that were in there, and it turned out there were many of those that were clearly in violation. And so together, the paralegal and the women collected evidence on the violations, and they drafted an application. And they didn't go to the courts. They went to an administrative institution, the Gujarat Pollution Control Board. And that started turning the wheels of enforcement. One of the pollution control officers came to visit, and he came up to this terrace. He met them and came up to this terrace, which that by itself really changed their outlook. Because in the past, they knew government officials always to just go to this company site, drink some tea, they would say, which may also mean some money gets passed, and then go back. They would never come and talk to the community members who live next door. So in this case, the pollution officer came to see these folks. He viewed things from their terrace, from their perspective. And I just talked to the guy I'm calling Kush. I just talked to him this morning, the paralegal who works with them. And the company has now committed to do 3 things: to cover those piles, to plant a green belt around the site, and to cover the trucks that are coming going from there. which are important, meaningful, incremental solutions. But the case is ongoing, and real justice for these people is going to take a long time. That's just one example. We work with paralegals in India in 4 different states. We work with paralegals in Sierra Leone, where I used to live, and there they are working with communities whose land is of interest to mega agricultural plantations, like 42,000 hectares for oil palm. We work with communities who are being asked to put their thumbprints on 50-year lease agreements would sign away all the land they've ever known. We work with communities who are in the shadow of iron ore mines. Thank you. Yeah. In the shadow of iron ore mines, and the paralegals again help communities to understand what the rules say and try to get solutions. In Myanmar, where there's been a lot of land grabbing historically by the military and by crony companies, the paralegals help smallhold farmers to try to recover land that was taken for them or secure land rights to land that they still possess. The group I work with is called Namati, and a few of us are based here in the United States. And the question that we would like to explore is whether this experience of working on legal empowerment, of working with community legal workers, could be of value to the struggle for environmental justice here at home. And I just want to say make three observations based on our experience over the years to give you a little bit more of a sense of what we've learned over time. One is we talk about the journey from impact to violation to remedy. So like when those ladies started out, what they felt were impacts. It was making them sick. It was making their food dusty. It was making them sick. Those are impacts. What the guy I'm calling Kush, what he helped them to understand was that wasn't just a bad thing, it was a legal violation. And he helped show them the concrete provisions in law and policy that the company was in violation of. And that right there is a light bulb. It's an important moment, an important transition. And then once you're armed with those, they started working towards a remedy using the administrative institutions. So that journey is how we think of this work, from impact to violation to remedy. And then I mentioned administrative institutions. They have been prominent for us in particular. Got you. In India, for example, traditionally the environmental movement has sort of had 2 big roads. One is protest. People have got out and put their bodies on the line in the way of damaging things. And another one is litigation. And both of those have been really important, and they have secured really important victories. But both of those roads have limits. Protest sometimes gets shut down, or in this case, they won for one day, and then the company came back the second day. It's also tough. It's a somewhat blunt tool to act on more granular violations. Litigation, on the other hand, is slow, it's expensive, it's hard to get judgments implemented. It is also disempowering. It tends not to go along with this idea of legal empowerment, because the moment you're in court, you're not advocating for yourself anymore. By definition, there needs to be a lawyer who is advocating on your behalf, and courts can be distant and complicated and take things away from communities. And so what we have found in India is that administrative institutions, which in India there are many of them, there's the Pollution Control Board, there's the Coastal Zone Management Authority, there's the district administration, that they are sitting on a lot of enforcement power, which they often are not using. And so when communities, some of the time, learn the rules and engage those institutions, they can get them to move. So administrative institutions have been prominent for us. That was the second observation. And the third one is about what we call the legal empowerment cycle, which is how we think about this work in the big picture, that on the one hand, these community paralegals work with communities to try to do the best they can with the rules that exist now. And case after case, like the case I just described, they work on getting meaningful solutions. But oftentimes those rules themselves, as we've been hearing about today, are inadequate, or if anything, they are repressive by design. And so what we try to do is use the aggregate experience of many cases. We track data on every single case paralegals handle, and we try to use that experience in the aggregate to advocate for improvements to laws and policies. And even if you do, so in Gujarat, for example, we managed to get new binding guidelines on the handling of minerals that were based on many cases that we handled where we saw gaps in the current legal framework. But it's not just a one-way thing. The game is not over when you get that, because those words on the paper don't implement themselves. Those become new levers, new hooks, which paralegals can bring back to communities to try to breathe life into. So we think of it as no law, use law, shape law. That is the vision of legal empowerment, that everybody, even the least powerful, should be able to do all three of those things. Law should be something that every single person can understand, use, and shape. So that the questions that I want to leave you guys with are these, that how does this resonate with your own experience working on environmental justice? Has the law felt distant or abstract or opaque? Have you gone on journeys from impact to violation to remedy? Is it possible to squeeze justice out of administrative institutions like zoning boards, county public health offices, the MDE? And would it be possible to deepen legal empowerment among environmentally burdened communities in Maryland and Washington, D.C.? And what would it take to do that? Thanks, you guys.
So I guess all the panelists should get up and sit up here, and we got a lot of work to do, right? So let me, while they're doing that, let me just start. I think Adrienne had a whole bunch of questions about the state implementation plan guide, and I think she said, are you passing out cards?
I did. I passed it out earlier.
Okay, so one of the things you got to do before you leave is bring your cards back up to Adrienne. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second is that Yudith had a number of questions, and she wanted to get to hear from you about your experience here in the DMV area around just transition. And I guess, Judith's question also is something that Leslie's presentation spoke to in terms of what's happening in Puerto Rico. So,
I didn't follow directions, I didn't have any questions.
no, I know you didn't, but I
Sorry.
wanted,
I forgot.
but your presentation raised a lot of questions, right?
Right, thank you.
And so, why don't we spend, how much time do we have? 9 minutes. 9 minutes, okay. And then, let's see, so I told them ahead of time, I said the challenge with this panel is gonna be time. And then Vivek had a whole bunch of questions in terms of the community legal empowerment process, and our experience with the ideas that he had here. So how do we want to do this? Do any of you want to answer each of these, or you're welcome to ask your own questions? Go ahead.
Hi, Rebecca Rear. I work at the Time for Health program at UCL America, and I'm coming off a couple of years of state advocacy work, and one of the biggest things we face is that when we are dealing with state agencies or elected officials, or a lot of times use health language to bring them on board with environmental justice work, but the biggest challenge we face is when they say, we can't prove causation, so what am I supposed to do here? So I'm sure you've also how do you respond to that, and how do you respond to that to an agency, to an elected official, they're holding the power. How do you answer that question when they ask?
Okay. I guess that's to any of you.
Or do you want to take a couple comments at a time? Up to you. You want to collect a couple?
We only have 9 minutes.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead? Why don't we go ahead with this one, and then we'll go.
Yeah. When I was a professor, that was a big issue too. And that's when we started working with universities and partnering with that data. Of course, now with the current, part of the administration is to get rid of science, to get rid of some of the science that we get. What we say is, it's hard to prove causation, I know that, but I think citizen science is important. I think people's stories, that's important, that on one street, 45 people died from cancer. You could call it a cancer cluster if you want to. I'm telling you, 45 people died on this street, and to me that means something. I think if you make enough noise, I think that those sorts of points are important. And that's what we do, is gather those sorts of data, information. It's not data, I mean, it's
And I hope my question was also sort of an answer to your question. I think some of that information should be included in guide
Mm.
is how people can answer that question when they're faced with it. It's
Mm.
something that I got a lot, and always it's hard to translate science in a 3-minute testimony in front of the board.
Mhm.
So how, you know, and when you're talking about a state implementation plan of a federal policy, how do you incorporate the health language? Because the most frequent question that I got was, well, if you can't, you know, you're the health person, if you can't prove causation, what am I as a lawmaker?
Mm.
Thank you.
Okay, question or comment?
I had a question for the first speaker. What is your definition of youth?
Well, that varies because I've worked with several groups that have like from 6 years old to 14 years old, and I'm part of groups that work with 14-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and then this group is actually made up of 18-year-olds to 29-year-olds.
Mm.
So it really just varies on what youth means to, you know, the community that you're serving or working with, and you can define that as, you know, you best see fit. But youth kind of varies. I mean, we've had people that are 35 years old still considered youth in our groups, because, you know, they're still in school, they're still like struggling financially, or they're still growing, and so, you know, they're still young people. But yeah, it varies from different organization to organization. And I don't define just like one group of youth. I work with all youth across the spectrum.
Okay, did you have a question?
What are these for?
For me,
Okay, what?
or to write, if you have any thoughts on the presentation or any things that you think should be included, or things I should think about, like the young lady just said.
Mm. In the guide that she presented.
Yeah. Just to cut it, so you won't have to ask questions on that.
Yes, in the back.
For environmental organizations with a national historically environmental focused perspective, what should the role be in addressing the legal empowerment cycle? I mean, we heard from what you're talking about in the work of Rico.
Yeah.
I see that as very distinct from a lot of the other work that we've engaged in.
Right.
Where normally, unfortunately, it's not people from the area.
Exactly.
Empowering them and forming oriented decisions.
Yeah.
So what do you all think the role should be?
Well, I think the rule should be, I'm a Star Trek person, so I believe in the Prime Directive, and if people speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's also part of the Hermes principles for engagement, and I think it's incredibly important that attorneys, just as Vivek said, is that there has to be an understanding that the attorney has a role, the community has a role. The attorney's there, not there to save you. You are there. The attorney's there. The attorneys are there to support you because you're all saving yourselves. And so, but sometimes that's not so easy. And I think a lot of problems are because, and Vivek said this also really well, is the professionalization of all this work. You know, I used to do contested case hearings and school citing cases, and you know, you'd have Mrs. Brown, who's been in the community for 50 years. She was there when the creek ran clean and there were crayfish and Indian artifacts, and then the plan comes in, and you know, 50 years later, all her grandchildren have asthma. And she's talking about how it was, and then the other side gets up and says, "Are you a hydrologist, toxicologist, pathologist, blah blah blah," and tries to destroy that person, right? And we have to buck her up to say, "I have been living it. This is my lived experience, and I know, right, how it was." And you can document how it was because other people have been there, and there's also land records and all that other good stuff. You have to do that due diligence. We had that last year with a case in New Orleans. They wanted to put a school on a dump, and we went back. This was our good friend, maybe you know, Monique Harden did this research. She found out through the land records, this was the same dump that existed in 1929, and then she went back to Louis Armstrong's autobiography where he talks about this particular dump in that particular place. That's the kind of research, that's the kind of creative lawyering that you have to do, all right? So then someone put together a child-sized hazmat suit, and we put one of the kids in the hazmat suit, and we said for the PR campaign, this is going to be your child's new school uniform if this school is built on this dome. Your kid's going to have to wear a hazmat suit to go to school. Alright, so that's the kind of, I mean, the lawyer's doing the research, the community comes up with a creative, catchy campaign. You gotta do all these things. It's gotta be a campaign. And the sad thing is that the burden's on the community to do all this work. The burden's on the community to do this after their 2 jobs and getting their kids in school and making dinner and trying to get back and forth, and to put all this together. And so we see ourselves, my program, support that, that work with, WEAC, all these other organizations, Judith, all these great coalitions have had to get formed in order to support each other, because the Greens can't win by themselves, and they're finally starting to understand that.
Okay, I think, are we at a hard stop right now?
Yeah, very hard.
Okay.
They keep looking at me.
So, everybody's trying to barge into this room.
You have something to say before I
Yeah, so let me just say, everybody should give a huge round of applause for this panel. I think they have a lot of great things to share with us. And they are going to be here. They are going to be here, and they came here to do some work, and they would love for you to help them advance the work that they're doing. So.
Thank you.